my pleasure to introduce today's three distinguished panelists and listen in to their conversation. I begin with our first panelist, Professor Anup Dhar, who was a medical doctor while he was also a keen follower of the political. Both shaped his biograph. On the one hand, he moved to histories of healing and philosophies of the body, and thereafter to mental health, especially post-Foucauldian psychiatry and post-Freudian psychoanalysis. On the other, the passion for non-party political imaginations took him to the interstices of Marxist and feminist perspectives. The question of cultural difference is, however, a major preoccupation for him. He has a PhD in philosophy from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He was professor of philosophy at Ambedkar University, Delhi, until recently, before moving back to Kolkata. Our next panelist is Dr. Bhaskar Mukherjee. He is a student of psychiatry, the medical discipline dealing with the full working and dysfunction of the brain. Molecular biology is where he feels most comfortable, and for him, psychiatry is molecular psychiatry. He loves to understand and evaluate the pathophysiological basis of psychiatric symptoms, both macroscopically and microscopically. Going from connectomics
to genomics.
Connectomics to genomics. His interest areas are treatment resistance in psychiatry and transdiagnostic understanding of psychiatry. And his life's goal is to make psychiatry regain the master spot in medicine, a spot reserved for the medical specialty dealing with the master organ of the body. And last but not the least, I come to the third panelist, Dr. Anurag Mishra. Dr. Mishra is a psychiatrist and psychoanalytical psychotherapist trained in India and Europe, though no one country is to blame for him. He is a serial founder, the founder of Psychoanalysis India, which helped to organize the international psychoanalytical conferences in Delhi, along with the annual Sigmund Freud talks. The founder of Livonics Publishing, which has been publishing books on psychoanalysis, mental health, organizational dynamics, and economics, among other. The founder of Livonics Infotech. He is also the academic advisor to the University of Latvia International Institute of Indic Studies in Riga. He is the co-editor of Psychoanalysis from the Indian Terroir, along with Professor Anup Dhar, who is on the panel, and Manasi Kumar, though he did most of the wine drinking purely to research the concept of terror, he says. He is continuing this research every evening in the Latvian countryside where he presently resides. I welcome you all.
Thank you, Sonali. So my name is Anurag Mishra, and I'm to blame for today's event. I'm the founder of Livonics Institute of Integrated Learning and Research, where we focus on disruptive and integrated learning and research. I'm very fond of quoting my favorite philosopher, Alan Watts, who famously said, "Problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. At Livonics Institute, we focus on asking questions and finding answers through the simultaneous use of multiple lenses. We believe that we can see clearer when we add on the lens of a different discipline to the pre-existing one. And then, much like going to an optometrist, we can see the writing on the wall in a clearer way. So this is about me. Today, we are going to be doing something quite disruptive, maybe even explosive. And but first, I would like to talk about this question, which is the topic of our conversation. And I think a conversation is a very civilized way to deal with questions rather than lectures or other things like that. So the story of this topic began more than 30 years ago, probably much more than 30 years ago, when I was in school and I was supposed to be attending to a lecture on Macbeth, I suspect. And I was looking out of the window at a rather attractive lady, which my teacher noticed and then asked me with some irritation, "Where are your brains?" So this is the question which I have been trying to answer for a very long time. And in this long time, my fickle brain has gone from engineering to medicine to psychiatry to psychoanalysis, and then to a whole host of other disciplines, which made many people, including me, wonder whether I had at least lost my mind, if not my brains. During these somewhat nomadic travels of my mind and brain, which I will try to illustrate, I met other nomads, gypsies of the mind, two of whom are my panelists today. And I must say that everybody who is in Livonics Institute of Learning and Research is absolutely peripatetic. Nobody is ever to be found in the same place twice. You may call them after 10 minutes, they will be in another location. So they are not only gypsies of the mind, they're also real gypsies. For example, to talk with Bhaskar about this lecture, I contacted him in Delhi, Chandigarh, Shimla, Narkanda,
Srinagar.
and Srinagar, among other places. I contacted him on a car, plane, and some other vehicle. To contact Anup about this lecture, I contacted him in Chhattisgarh, Delhi, and Calcutta. These are the three places which I remember. On a bus, on a train, and for once he was sitting down somewhere. So this is a bunch of real gypsies which we have in our institute, and that is a very important point. Because all of them have traveled intellectually through many disciplines. For example, Dr. Bhaskar Mukherjee has traveled, as far as I know, there may be many other places he has traveled to. He has traveled to through medicine, psychiatry, neuroscience, genetics, and the words which Sonali found difficult to pronounce, connectomics, genomics, and so on. Anup is a medical professional and a left political activist. He did his post-structural critiques of mental health took him to psychoanalysis, and post-colonial critiques of the left took him to a rethinking of the political. He has edited numerous books, which will not enumerate, numerous articles, which will take up the entire time of our talk today. So we'll not go into that, but few that I wanted to mention are Breaking the Silo, Integrated Science Education in India, Psychoanalysis, which they from the Indian terroir, which we co-edited together, and Clinic, Critique, and Culture, which is upcoming, along with his massive work on the English writings of Girendra Shekhar Bose, annotated edition of the English writings of Girendra Shekhar Bose, the first Indian psychoanalyst, titled Original Psychoanalysis, which is a topic for another lecture. So to answer this question, I will, first ask Bhaskar to try and put his thoughts on board. Then maybe Professor Anubhar, and then maybe I'll try and do something with that. But more than anything else, I wanted to say something about the Livonics Institute. A university is a place where the earth pauses to breathe and think, and it is a place to be protected. And recently it has been not protected, but we are very intent on protecting this space so that people can think freely for themselves and for everybody else. So Bhaskar, what is our brain? Where the hell is it? Why is it an important, if not the most important organ? And any other thoughts that you may have on this subject?
So, from my perspective, I would not say it is one of the most important. I would always say it is the most important. In fact, I would suggest everyone to close their eyes and think about an organism which consists of brain, two protruding eyeballs, a tail-like spinal cord hanging down from the body, and a group of nerves hanging down from the body. If you can visualize this organism, this is actually you. Actually, we are this organism. Rest of the body is just an exosuit that this organism wears. Now, you would say, so rest of the body is not us. I would say not us, because let's say someone chop one hand of a person. We can easily transplant another hand. Similarly, everything in our body is replaceable. Face, replaceable. Heart, kidney, lungs, everything can be transplanted and are being transplanted all over the world. Skin being transplanted, muscle, everything can be transplanted except this organism. You cannot transplant brain. You cannot transplant spinal cord. You cannot transplant eye, because this is the main part of the organism that is human being. If you remove or change any of these areas, the organism changes. So first you have to understand brain is the master organ of this whole exoskeleton. Then we have to understand that brain controls this, and then would come the third and fourth layer. Brain controls this via immune system and various immune mediators, neuroendocrine system and various hormones, also via intricate neural connection to every organ of the body. Every organ means there is no organ of body which doesn't receive direct nerve connection from brain. Initially, we used to think that bone marrow has no neural connection, but recent year we came to know that bone marrow, lymph gland, lymph node, every area has their own neural connection, and that determines their various cycles, life cycle and other thing. Now I was talking about the third and fourth layer. This is the first and second physical layer. The third layer is reality. When we see reality, we have to understand that we are not seeing anything real. We are seeing a artificial overlay of reality created by our brain. our brain, starting from the day one of postnatal life, creates our reality. Let's say I am seeing someone is playing in a huge football ground. For me, football has no special attraction. So for me, that is my reality would be someone is playing in a field with football and someone or some other people are seeing that. I would associate that with my fear of too many people, my personal dislike of organized social structure and other thing, and I would create a reality of my own. Now replace me and place another brain which loves cricket, which follows cricket, which find cricket and various cricket clubs very exciting. That person would see this football game and a person playing football in a football field, and that person would create his or her own meaning. That brain would create something that I love cricket, but I am seeing a person seeing football. I am seeing a group of people which might be things other, which might be better utilized by seeing cricket and other things. Now take a brain which is devoted towards football, and that brain would be overjoyous and create another reality. I have just given one single example of a game, its associated feeling, and three different realities created by three different brains. Now take everything in our environment. Everything that we see has a memory engram for us. Memory engram means a part of memory which is we learned previously, and that memory engram actually would create some special meaning of that thing in our brain. And you would understand that there are n number of realities that can happen with each of us in just a simple same stimulation. So that way, brain becomes the most important organ of ours. Then comes the external environment, brain, and our society. Brain creates society. First, we have to understand that we are a hive organism. Each cell of our body has a own life cycle, and our brain is result of those life cycle interacting with each other. Now, take each individual as like that single cell, and our society is actually a hive organism where each of these brain interact and form a complex mega structure of a mega animal. If we think and think really critically, why has humanity become the apex predator of Earth ecosystem? It shouldn't be. We don't have anything special like teeth, like sharp claws, like other animals' physical power, like other animals' various physical attributes. We are not very good swimmers. We are not very good runners. We are not very good in anything. But yet today, after 20 million years roughly of human species originated, human beings are the apex predator of this ecosystem. If we now, if we take a single member of human species and place them in a wilderness, they would die. They would be killed by various other animals, because singularly human being would be same bottom to medium pillar of a ecological pyramid. But if you join a group of human and create a society, that society in itself become a mega organism, and that society would dominate every other organism in a ecological pyramid. And that joining of society, that joining of society to that joining of human being to create a society is again an attribute of brain. It starts in very primitive mammalian level. If you think about whales, they have a primitive society. If you think about, in fact, non-mammalians like ant, they have a primitive society. But as human brain is considerably more developed in various ways, they have started understanding how to join with other brains via means of various verbal communication, via means of various knowledge transfer and other things. And ultimately, their societies are truly multi-appendage single organ. And those single organs are the masters of Earth ecological pyramid. So if we say, where is our brain? It starts with, it is the organ that is actually who we are. Two, it is the organ that communicate with other organs to create a animal which is multiple brain combined, and which is the apex ruler of this Earth ecosystem. And it is ruling very badly, no doubt, but it is ruling. So this is where our brain is, everywhere and inside our skull.
This
A
is
very schematic view.
This is a good and bad. Good because you have said more or less what I was going to say. Bad because good because you have said more or less what I was going to say, and I thought, I'll be the first one to say it. But we are good that we are on the same page, but bad because I'm going to run short of things to say eventually. So now I don't know. Are you through, Bhaskar? Should I ask
Yes.
Anup to speak?
No,
Yeah.
Gachi,
Yeah, you wanted to make some other point. Yeah.
No. This is more or less my point. I would like to for others to contribute. Then I might again contribute something more. But for now, this is a good base.
So this the part of my brain which is in Bhaskar has spoken. Anup, please. Would you like to say something? You're on mute, Anup.
Let me build on where Bhaskar has left us, and look at the questions he has raised already for us, and kind of reflect on them. I'll also in the process open up the course that we want to do. This course titled Psychoanalysis in Practice, between philosophy and neuroscience, is not born out of knowingness. It is born out of doubt, self-doubt, questions that fold back upon us. And the questions are somewhat like this. What might psychoanalytic practice look like if sincere and sustained efforts are made to integrate the many implications flowing from cutting-edge neuroscience research in the contemporary? And Bhaskar is somebody who has foregrounded that and is somebody who can really take us through this. We would hence perhaps need to begin by delineating the limits of psychoanalytic practice when it is faced with revelations arising from new scientific investigations of the brain. Ignoring the advances of neurobiology perhaps lands the theorist of subjectivity into a little bit of metaphysical dogmatism. It will therefore need to ask this course, can psychoanalysis and neuroscience mutually enrich each other if brought to dialogue and integrated with care? Is philosophy the missing link between psychoanalysis and neuroscience? Both the psychoanalytic and neuroscientific sides of this hybrid interdisciplinary formation with streaks of integration and disruption, as Anurag suggests, or interruption, may have to be dialectically rethought. One needs perhaps a neuroscientific psychoanalysis and a psychoanalytic neuroscience. Now, what is that? Neither psychoanalysis nor the neurosciences nor philosophy, especially the philosophy of the subject or the philosophy of the self, can remain unchanged anymore in passing through these unavoidable disciplinary interactions. So this is kind of the setting up of the course, that we need to think these three together, not just integrate, they disrupt and interrupt each other. And would that open up a rethinking of psychoanalysis? Hence, actually, this course is not premised on the idea that, oh, we know it all and now put it to practice. This course is premised on a thinking or a rethinking of our basic premises. Okay, so it's not in the model of normal science. It's in the model of rethinking the very framework. I dare not say paradigm. But those are the kinds of nightmares I have of late when I actually, as a student of psychoanalysis, and as a new student, an old student who has again become a new student of neuroscience, begin to see these spaces, I begin to actually get nightmares that we really need to talk, really need to rethink. And the fundamental thing we perhaps need to rethink is the theory of the function of the unconscious. Including the concept of the unconscious, actually, in psychoanalysis. And this is what we will do in the course, actually. We really need to think this side and reflect. I'll come to this if I get time, Anurag. The core rethinking would be between the topographical model, conscious, pre-conscious, unconscious, and the structural model, ego, superego. Where do we place the superego? Are these two models different? Is there a movement in Sigmund Freud himself from 1915 to 1923? Did he rethink the premise of psychoanalysis and the concept of the unconscious as he moved from the unconscious piece, 1915, to the id and the ego and the id, 1923. The 1907 piece is also important, but that we will take up in the course. These two models don't map onto the other. There is an interruption in these two models. And why is there an interruption? What does this interruption mean? So this is one. The second question, actually, that we need to engage with today is that is what I will call the hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness that faces the question of not where is consciousness coming from, but the question why and how consciousness arises. How and why do neurophysiological activities produce the experience of consciousness? Something, it is likeness of experience, the core question is why and how does the subjective quality of experience arise from objective neuropsychological events, what I'm calling the hard problem of consciousness. The simpler problem is to locate it in the where, but why? But why? And this opens up the question of the difficulty of explaining things in functional terms. It is important because, say, for example, perception readily occurs without awareness of what is perceived, and learning without awareness of what is learned. Therefore, what we need to really think is the difference between vision as an intrinsically non-conscious function. I didn't say unconscious. I will also actually mark a distinction between non-conscious and unconscious. But the experience of vision, the performance of these functions, say vision accompanied by experience, and that takes us to the question of intentionality. So we don't see like a camera, we don't hear like a tape recorder. What is the difference between a camera seeing and us seeing? So how does one work one's way through these questions? And a similar question would be raised not for just visual experience, but for affective functions. How can one have a feeling without feeling it? How can we explain the functional mechanism of affect without explaining why and how it causes us to experience something? Even Freud underscored, quote, the essence of an emotion is in the fact that we should be aware of it. So consciousness once again over there. However, the problem over here is twofold. One, localization doesn't work. There is within each human being no one brain, only some brains, if I may put it that way. I take it from Alan Badiou. And the second point, and there is no time to get into that, why localization doesn't work, why we need to have a much more integrated view of consciousness and the unconscious and brain functions. And the other problem is corticocentrism, what I'm calling corticocentrism, that since cortical consciousness is contingent upon brainstem consciousness, affect is revealed to be the foundational form of consciousness. The sentient subject is literally constituted by affect. I'll open this up. Give me 2 minutes on this, and it can be opened up. I'm leaving aside today the question of non-localization and plasticity. We can take it up in the course.
No, we are in the mode of Indian classical music where an alap can go on for many hours. So you don't need to ask for 2 minutes. You can take 2 hours if you want.
No, I won't take more than what Bhaskar has taken. Anurag, just opening up the question of corticocentrism, what I'm calling corticocentrism. Consciousness is not equal to cortex. Contemporary affective neuroscience opens up space for brainstem consciousness and affective consciousness. The unconscious is also not equal to either only being cortical or only subcortical. Is it an in-between? Is it the function of a plastic form of originary multiplicity? We'll explore these questions in the course. The other problem over here is that, and let me read out one paragraph. For Freud, conscious feelings, no less than perceptions, are generated in the ego, the part of the mind that he identified with the cortex, not in the unconscious id, which we are now obliged to locate in the brainstem and hypothalamus, broadly put. In short, it seemed that Freud got the functional relationship between the id, brainstem, and the ego cortex, perhaps the other way round, at least insofar as feelings are concerned. He thought the perceiving ego was conscious and the feeling id was unconscious. Could he have got his model of the mind upside down? And this is the challenge to psychoanalysis neuroscience is throwing up. And this opens up a question for us. 19th century and the 19th century ideas regarding the top down, the top controlling the bottom, and top down ideas determining how we think, even the neural self or the brain, the cortex controlling the lower part, the brain stem. The other problem is the problem of the inside and the outside, that we are at the same time perceiving the world as also perceiving our inside. And while much of our attention has been on perceiving the outside, which is waking state consciousness, what is the question of phenomenal consciousness, consciousness of the I, of feeling states emanating from within. This opens up the question of consciousness from below, from inside, internal perceptions, rather than from above and only from outside, from external perceptions. And what is the relationship between affective consciousness and cognitive consciousness? I have worked many years to show develop a theory of capitalism from below rather than from above, and think beyond capitalocentrism. But here the question is corticocentrism, and how one needs to rethink the structure of corticocentrism, and how this has so it is not that it is only coming from outside, it is also emanating from inside. It is not that it is the top controlling the bottom, it is an irradiation of the brainstem above as well. And this is actually what I would call empiricist associationism. I don't have the time to get into that in neurology, which later coincided with cognitive revolution in psychology. This opens up the question of the unconscious. Anurag, tell me how many minutes I have, because I'll do it accordingly.
You can go on till tomorrow morning.
No, don't say that. Don't say that. Then let me open up the question of the unconscious. Do we then need to think and rethink the question of the unconscious? We'll read in the course The Unconscious Piece of Sigmund Freud, 1950. And there is a section in that piece called Unconscious Emotions. And for Freud, there are no unconscious effects. There are unconscious ideas. Repression is essentially a process affecting ideas. And this question requires perhaps a reopening in the 21st century, given the insights that are coming from neuroscience. This also will open up the question of the self. What is the self? And how do we think the self? Does emotion play a fundamental role in the constitution of the cerebral psyche? The brain affects itself, and this is an important line. The brain affects itself. The ego, is it a perceptive surface where internal excitation and external demands meet each other? And here the ego of Freud and the self of the neurobiologist could come to a conversation with respect to the perception of internal states and the perception of external events. The perception of external events have been perhaps over foregrounded in what I'll call neurobehaviorism. But the perception of internal states require rethinking, which could be called, kind of internal processes, and this process, Anurag, let me put it this way: the core of the human self is only born as the story is told within the story itself. We are the music while the music lasts. So that is an important point over here. Um, what happened actually in the history of psychoanalysis, and here one perhaps needs to reconsider Lacan's Freud inspired dualism, strictly partitioning signifiers and effects, notwithstanding the seminar on anxiety, the question of the half chicken in seminar 17, and the question of affect in later seminars post seminar 20. But that's a different discussion. We do it in the course, but this division requires a little bit of rethinking. That should we divide signifiers and affects, ideas and effects, or do we need to keep them in conversation, in integration, in dialogue? Last point, affects are also, like thought, reflexive second-order phenomena, like the desire of desire in Lacan. There are filterings, foldings, mediations, redoublings, and feelings are always feelings of feelings. Unconscious, perhaps, acts, operates in the gap between feelings and the feelings of feelings. The real feel of feeling masked by conscious misfeelings. And hence, we perhaps need to rethink the unconscious across what I will call known unknowns, which we had foregrounded all along, but felt and the unfelt. Or it could be put this way, the relationship between unfelt and misfelt. The gap between having a feeling and knowing a feeling, and this opening, the feeling is unattended to by first person consciousness. It's an unfelt feeling, or the feeling is interpreted by first person consciousness, misfelt feelings, and this is the opening that we will have over here. Feelings are then internal perceptions, and one can have a feeling without knowing it. This process is what we will open up in the course, and will that open up a rethinking of what we understand as the unconscious. We'll distinguish between cognitive unconscious, which I'm calling the non-conscious, and the Freudian or the dynamic unconscious. The cognitive unconscious or the non-conscious merely implies that a lot of what the mind does, goes on outside of consciousness. That's non-conscious. That's not the Freudian unconscious. Whereas the dynamic Freudian unconscious is a darker, more malevolent place where emotionally charged memories are shipped to do mental duty work. And this opening is required. Excessive focus on cortical processes will make us miss the cognitive, will make us foreground the cognitive non-conscious and miss the Freudian unconscious. And hence I say, while we need neuropsychoanalytic, while we need neuroscientific psychoanalysis, we also need perhaps psychoanalytic neuroscience. And that is what we will take up in the course. Uh, this question is this connection is what we will take up, explore in the course. What is it to think together like a Mobius in an interrelated way, neuroscientifically informed psychoanalysis and psychoanalytically informed neuroscience. To do this, we cannot lapse in two existing divides, top down, inside outside, localized, non-localized, rigid, plastic, conscious, unconscious. Ego could be thought as both conscious and unconscious, superego as both conscious and unconscious. And Freud opens up this question in 1923 by invoking the unconscious sense of guilt. Thought effect, we cannot divide it as separated. Surface and depth. How to integrate, relate the two, bring them to dialogue, disrupt, interrupt, integrate. And this is what we will try to do the course. Thus we place psychoanalysis in between, not in the middle, not at the middle. It's not a midpoint between philosophy and neuroscience. It is in between philosophy and neuroscience. Being in between is not its weakness, it is its promise. It will make us see, just like we do not know or feel the other's thought or feelings. We can only feel for the other. We cannot feel the other's pain. Is there within us something that is unknown to us and unfelt in us? Something that is mispronounced, slips of the tongue, something that is not just unfelt, but misfelt, slips of feeling. Thank you, Anurag.
Thank you, Anup. So now I have even less to say, and you have talked about a lot of stuff. And somebody asked me before, who is this conversation aimed at? And who's going to understand all of it? I said, nobody's going to understand all of it. Even the speakers will not understand all of it. Somebody will understand something, somebody will understand something else. And hopefully, the people for whom it is going to be important are people, as I think you, Anup, said, is that for people who don't know everything, for people who know everything, this is neither this nor our courses are of any use at all. People who want to be somebody are also not the perfect fit for us. People who really are interested in the mysteries of the world and who are willing to travel here and there to understand them are probably people who would appreciate what we are talking about, or who would be interested in our courses as well. Because the question that you have raised is a question which should not be asked, as Winnicott said, when he was talking about transitional objects, the soft toys that children hold. That, in his words, that it is a matter of agreement between us and the baby, that we will never ask the question, did you conceive of this, or was it presented to you from without? This important point is that no decision on this point is expected. The question is not to be formulated, right? What is inside, what is outside, what is brain and what is mind, that they are two aspects of the same coin or the same Mobius strip, if one were to look at it that way. So, as can be seen, when I was looking at the attractive young lady, my mind was distracted by her. I may even have been said to have lost my mind, which is actually, what we mean when we say that, I lost my heart. I gave my heart to so and so. But what of the brain? You know, the heart, is the realm of poets, artists, and single malt whiskeys. Uh, the mind is the realm of serious psychoanalysts who usually don't say anything, who rock in their chair like this and hum and haw. But the brain is much more material. You can see it. As Bhaskar disappeared, his image was replaced by the MRI of a brain. You can see it if somebody has an accident, he spills his brains on the road, or if you have a CT scan or an MRI. You can see the brain. But as Bhaskar has shown, the brain is not only located in the organ, in the skull, most commonly identified with it, but it extends its influence throughout the body through nerves and hormones, etc. And the body receives information and stimuli, processes and reacts by producing nerve impulses and hormones, and sometimes even these strange things called thoughts, cognitive products, the thoughts and even feelings. It can make the heart go faster, and then it can interpret that the heart going faster, and in a thought that, hey, I'm attracted to that person. It can start by interpreting its own body, and sometimes it misinterprets the body as well. So these thoughts can be encoded in language and actions, and can be transmitted to other organisms, as Bhaskar identified, of the same species and other species as well, to be decoded and interpreted by others. What we think, we say that, and we wave our hands around increasingly nowadays. We are conceived, going back a little bit, we are conceived when an egg and a sperm meets. A thought and an impulse and an intent meet, and a baby develops out of this genetic code and becomes a child, and acquires intelligence and capacities to produce information, to produce thoughts, for example, and do things in the world in terms of speech and writing and action. Carrying on in the carvings on the walls of the world, paint cave wall paintings. It can be said that our actions and thoughts, now I want to look at it this way, that maybe it can be said that our actions and our thoughts were encoded in our genes. Our brains came from our genes, and our genes came from our parents. And where did their genes come from? Taking a short break, if you just stop this evolutionary journey, if you take a short break and look at ourselves in the pandemic that we live in, we realize that our bodies are full of various other organisms, bacteria, viruses, and even, God forbid, some multicellular parasites live inside us. But also that we realize that our DNA is made up, our ancestors were exactly the same bacteria and viruses, that we are their descendants. Not only do they live inside us, but they are our descendants. We are in a solid state of communication with them and with other people, through them and through our actions, through the information that we transmit, through what we say and through what we do. But not only that, every living being is made up more or less of the same stuff that we are made up of. Other species of animals, plants, insects, things at the border of living and non-living, like viruses, and even so-called non-living things, like rocks and oil and gas. They were once living things. The earth was gas. In fact, even the oxygen in the earth that we breathe is essentially a fart from the past. This is oxygen was produced by various organisms in our earth's ancient history, and that is the oxygen that we breathe. So where is our brain? As Bhaskar preempted me, can there ever be such a thing as a brain? I suspect, as he rightly pointed out, not for very long. It is always our brains. which are widely distributed, like nowadays they talk about blockchain technology, which I don't claim to understand, and non-fungible tokens and stuff like that. And we increasingly share our thoughts through electronic media and computers, which are, if I can say so, an extension of our brains. My brain is equally located in my mobile phone, in my computer, through which I am connecting with you, as it is in this skull. So any virus, whether it is RNA, DNA, or any piece of misinformation or disinformation electronically, can enter our interconnected brains and cause an attack on our network. And this is what happens when your virus attacks a computer network. There's a pattern which is produced. It is a fallacy to think of human beings as completely separated from others in terms of either in terms of species, in terms of nations, in terms of religions, or in terms of even disciplines of academic disciplines. Each identity, whether it is as a man, woman, Indian or Malaysian or anywhere else, or etc., every identity has its administrative uses. But to see each identity as a separate entity is a fallacy. The commonality that we have with other animals and everything else on this earth is far greater than the difference. We ignore it at a peril. Now I'm going to say something slightly, maybe slightly strange, maybe not, that there is only one brain, right? Bhaskar identified the human ecosystem, a bunch of human beings as one brain, each located in one of us. But I would say that, it can be said that we are the thinking and speaking and also destroying and other parts of the earth. That is that brain that operates, that maybe it was encoded that someday some Anurag Mishra would be born and he would speak this nonsense, that where is the brain of the brain. The brain of the brain is in the genes, and the genes of the genes go right back to viruses, and that goes right back to the inorganic structure of our earth, right? So that each brain, each person that we are, is a sprout, is a thinking, speaking, and so on sprout of this earth. And it is our responsibility to extend our intellect to the entire planet, and not to see that our brain is imprisoned in our skull. Our skull is like a helmet for its protection, not a prison, for the brain. Nor are our identities like that each a psychoanalytical person doesn't know anything about psychiatry, psychiatrist doesn't know anything about neuroscience or genetics or about the wider world. That just doesn't work, because we again and again come across the same problems that we are unable to solve, right? So this is, I think, where we are, that in this place that we various courses that we have thought of. Bhaskar is teaching a course in psychiatry in practice, which is connecting psychiatry to its roots in molecular biology and neurochemistry and so on. And you are leading the course in psychoanalysis, and plus there are a number of other people teaching. All the courses are taught by exceptional people, talking about stuff which goes beyond what is traditionally thought to be their discipline. But what I want to, after this long detour, what I want to come to is that what are the implications of this conceptualization of the brain? I'm going to stop in 1 minute, but the implications are for theory. That if we look at the brain, in the way that Bhaskar and you have talked about, now we'll have to study the anatomy of the brain becomes different than what is traditionally taught. The physiology of the brain is different from what was traditionally thought. The pathology of the brain becomes different from what was traditionally thought. Diagnosis becomes different. In fact, Bhaskar has stopped using DSM diagnosis now, much to the confusion of other people. and he refuses to do so. So I have to act as his interpreter now. The prognosis of diseases becomes difficult. It becomes different than what was originally thought. But also most interesting are the implications for practice. How do we practice if we look at the brain as situated inside and outside, in the social as well as in the social and cultural, as well as in the neurobiological milieu and the genetic milieu? Is what is beginning to happen now is that the way we see a person, uh, the way we approach a patient is now very different. The way we take a history is now very different. We ask for very many different things. For example, we ask about their parents' illnesses, their grandparents' illnesses, their dementia, their immunological disorders. We ask about their cultural milieu in which they were, what caste they were, etc. So Dr. Vankar is here. He is the one who taught me the importance of all this cultural things when I was back in my psychiatry days. And he would smile mysteriously when I would not have asked them, because he knew how important it was. Because identity is not a trap. Identity uh, is a tool, right? And we should be able to use various tools to further open up the mysteries that we are confronted with. Examination of a person, for example, in psychiatry or even in psychoanalysis, in terms of what questions you ask them, becomes an entirely different venture. When we take either of you two approaches, we ask very many different things. The tests that, for example, if Bhaskar is there, the tests that he would prescribe would be very different, and they would reveal very interesting things. They could be genetic tests, they could be immunological tests. But all this comes down to the treatment, that if we take your approaches and we treat somebody either as a psychoanalyst or as a psychiatrist or as whatever you want to call yourself, the treatment becomes very different. And we have been doing this different treatment. We have been using medicines in very different ways nowadays. We have been using psychoanalysis, for example. It was anathema. Even it is just recently the International Psychoanalytic Association announced that they were willing to accept, work on Skype or on the internet as psychoanalysis. But we have been doing this for quite some time. We have been doing this for more than 20 years. In fact, Sudhir Kakkar was the first one to do psychoanalysis on computer when you had to type your responses. Somebody would type something and he would type HUH, HUH, and then they would type, and it goes back to more than 30 years. We have been doing all this for a very long time because we realize the significance of what is outside and what is inside and what is common between these two things. That this is information coded in affects, in feelings, but also that this computer, this telephone, and so on is a part of me, is not something radically different from me. It is an extension of myself, of my brain. So we are engaged here in doing something not only disruptive and integrative, we are here in doing something explosive. What we are doing right now, and Sonali made a slip of tongue when she was supposed to say, he's exploring the terroir or something, he's exploring the terror, she said. But what we are doing is actually a bit of a terrorist activity. What we are doing now is we are exploding things. We are exploding psychiatry and we're exploding psychoanalysis. And how are we exploding it? Because we are exploding first the boundaries of the disciplines. What you need to know, right? We are exploding the boundaries of the identity. Who all do you need to be this person? Earlier I could be a cozy psychiatrist and not know about genetics or about this, that, and the other. Now, since I met Bhaskar, I've had to study so many damn things and read so many papers every week, and with Anup, I mean, if I manage to just finish reading his books, I mean, I'll have done a lot of work. So what all you need to know has expanded. You need to know a lot more. And it has expanded. It has also exploded the boundaries of the practice, what all you need to do. So willy-nilly, what we are doing right now is a rather terrifying thing, because we are changing these disciplines as we speak. They're not going to be the same again. And this might sound very grandiose, but I suspect it is true. But once we are done with this, they're not going to be the same disciplines again. People may try to repress it and may try to forget what we are saying, but it will have been said and it will have been done, and it will place a flag on the hill, which people will have to cross at some point or the other. So this is what I think you two gentlemen are doing. Bhaskar is probably more aware of his explosive activities. Maybe you are too, Anu, but you have been so used to it that you probably are not surprised by it. Yes, Anu.
Just adding a line over here, I have been deeply impressed by Bhaskar's move, I must admit, Anurag, actually, because the way he has rethought DSM, the way he has rethought medication, and his rewriting of psychoanalysis as clinical neuroscience or clinical, Bhaskar, it can be expanded also.
Psychiatry as
even
clinical,
say,
not psychoanalysis.
Psychiatry as clinical neuroscience, immunology, genetics. You may expand it actually, but it's very, very impressive, Anurag, actually, because that is the kind of breakthrough thinking, because then the DSM has to be rethought, actually.
The DSM has to be, I'm going to preempt Bhaskar, the DSM has to be thrown in the dustbin.
Yeah,
Yes.
I won't dare to say that, Anurag, but he really impressed me, inspired me also, Anurag. I just wanted to add that line, the way he actually is wanting to rethink the fundamental premises on which psychiatry is comfortable with.
Thank you. Actually, I would say one thing. Clinical neuroscience was the original branch, clinical and basic neuroscience. Then Freud and actually Sarko has broken it into two incomplete and joint branches.
Separated, yes.
Psychiatry and neurology. So it is originally psychiatry and neurology combined branch is clinical neuroscience. And these two separate branches should not exist. They should come together.
In fact, Anurag, one more line, please. Freud actually explores this question. Today, I could not show that, actually, Bhaskar, that up to a point, he's thinking of integrating matter mind, if you may put it that way, a materialist framework and a psychic framework. And because he does not have the tools at that time, finally he moves to psychology and metapsychology. But only to always harbor the thought and perhaps even a need and a fantasy to return. And today, since we have the ground, it is time to return rather than turn away once again. And this Orko is here. Orko, let's call it the other return to Freud, kind of opening up the other return to Freud. I was looking at your course also. It's absolutely exceptional, your course. And this is the opening that could get created over here. Go back to the project for a scientific psychology, reread it, Bhaskar, and this separation that has happened, even the hyper separation between natural and human sciences, Bhaskar, that is the breaking the silo book, actually, where we try to think these two together, but now a more located problematic. How do you think quote unquote the subjective and the objective? That divide is also problematic, this subject object divide, or meta psychology and metamaterialism, mechanical materialism and mechanical psychology. How do you connect these two, actually? So I take your point very, very seriously, Bhaskar, over here, and it's actually very interestingly Sigmund Freud who marks the departure, actually, but who himself was in clinical neuroscience before he moves to metapsychology.
Yes.
I think I also take this opportunity to break the silo that only three of us should speak. Since we have called in Arco, and we also, you can say whatever is on your mind. I'm sure there is something on your mind. I've never met a Lacanian who didn't have something on his mind. So,
I have too many things on my mind. So I
and
better not speak.
after you, anyone else who wants to speak, because this is a conversation after all, please say whatever it is which is on your mind. You first.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anurag, and thank you, Anupta, and thank you, Bhaskar, for Anupta. Thank you for very kindly mentioning my humble course that I do on philosophy, cognition, and psychoanalysis, which does have a lot of overlap with what you were reflecting upon. I just had, I'm not sure whether this is a question. I have too many thoughts running in my mind. Not everything is conscious. So anyway, I won't go into all the things that I'm thinking of at this point. I'll just restrict myself to one comment, which may not be a question, but I'm sure it will open up a response perhaps for all three of you. I was just thinking of this whole problem of localization, and there is also a certain, as in fact all of you have, in fact Bhaskar and Anupta, both of you, and Anurag, all of you have problematized this idea of localization, especially in a kind of a unilateral localization of the brain. I'm just wondering how it reflects on, in fact, that division that we often make. And as you were, especially as Anupta was saying, it's not a translation from the conscious, preconscious, unconscious to the ego, superego. I was wondering, in fact, about the need to localize the unconscious. Whether we need to localize the unconscious. I mean, of course, there have been certain positions on this taken by neuropsychoanalysts like Mark Soms and so on, who have very strongly, in fact, gone in a certain direction that you were already indicating there. But I'm just wondering about the need to localize the unconscious at all in a particular part of the body. Because again, if we follow the ideas in Lacan's late teachings, possibly we will come to a point where the unconscious is not localizable. The unconscious is unlocalizable, at least in terms of the let's say the medical dynamic of the body. But it is definitely localizable at the level of the signifying body, the body that speaks and the body that creates meaning and has a pathology of meaning as well in terms of how language impinges on the body. I'll just restrict myself to that. Thank you.
How to go about, Anurag? Go one by one?
Whatever. I mean, if something comes to your mind, you.
No, a lot comes to my mind. Orko, come back with your video. come back.
This is a conversation after.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suspect, we have become so used to this top-down corticocentric, and in India, so-called pravachan mode, where the guru gives the lecture, that we have forgotten how to talk to each other or talk with each other.
Yeah.
So, when we are talking, we also look at that. So who should speak now? Whoever has something to say can speak, man.
Yeah. Orko, absolutely exceptional point. I actually go with the framework that the unconscious need not be localized. Localization is a fantasy and a fiction perhaps we need to give up. Okay. Hence, we will, in fact, neurobiologists are also talking of the neural self in terms of connections, network, assemblage, all kinds of processes because of the, plastic nature of it. So let us not go there. Just one way of going about perhaps, and I don't know, I'm myself thinking actually, and how Lacan remains, in this thinking with both you and me, at least, is that One is signifiers. You take the mystic writing pad piece of Sigmund Freud as the most important and build on it. Um, uh, uh, but the other way to think about it would be to think about it in terms of function. One way to think about it would be in terms of function. I have sometimes tried to suggest that in dreams, the brain is acting in reverse gear. It's the same apparatus. In waking state, it is acting in a certain way. In dreams, it is just acting in reverse gear. And there is no time to get into the neurobiology of it, but it can be done actually to show that it's actually acting in reverse gear. So it's not that the brain has changed. It's the functional nodal points that have shifted actually. And Lacan is the one who repeatedly says function of the unconscious.
I can jump in right now before
Yes.
Bhaskar had a lot to say about dreams at one point. And he has a whole neurobiological model of dreams, but also the brains act in unconscious ways. For example, they can produce various chemicals which are transmitted from one person to another, and it's not really very clear how that happens. But one of the signs that, for example, that you have stopped loving somebody is that a person that whom you love and who always smelled nice suddenly stops smelling nice. That is the first sign that you're out of love with that person, and that is an unconscious communication from brain to brain. For example, I mean, Bhaskar, of course, can give other examples.
Pheromone, optic bulb, and out. We act, but that would be a bit complex. Actually, just like snakes have some organ or various other lizards have, our brain also has an association with smell. Our brain do learn about various other people via smell. For example, if you like someone, that person's body odor is actually charming to you. Similarly, there are many males and many females who associate their sense of smell with their arousal. They can actually smell different stages of their partner by just smelling the partner, and they don't even need to smell directly. Every human being secrete some chemicals which are producing odors, and many human beings still retain the actually power to smell those and assess that. This is one of the instinctive learning, I would say, not even instinctive, I would say innate learning, innate plus instinctive. And like our so-called developmental milestone, which are actually innate learning milestone, these smells are also part of who you are.
I mean, it is as, for example, I remember a long time ago, we were supposed to be talking about, there was a panel in which I was supposed to speak, and I was representing psychoanalysis at that time. And somebody else was representing hypnosis at that time. And people were trying to instigate me to say something negative about hypnosis. Whereas the thought which was with me is that we're always hypnotizing each other. We're always trying to suggest things to each other, that how serious I am, or how good looking I am, or how unattractive I am, or how intellectual I am, not just by the way what we are saying, but the way we look, the way we behave, and so on. So in fact, it is very difficult to find an encounter where hypnosis is not being attempted. And some people, of course, take it to extremes, including some people that all of us know, when they are very, very conscious about how they look on camera, etc. They engage in mass hypnosis, and they're very successful at it, right? We mere mortals are not so good at it, but we do try. So this business of conscious and unconscious is, and what is coded and what is not coded is difficult. Now, suddenly I don't see Anup or Bhaskar or you, Arka. There you are, Anup, you're back. Bhaskar has replaced himself with somebody's brain, might be his own or somebody else's. So he's attending to the topic of this conversation very seriously.
Others now, Anurag, I think.
Please
let us stop.
Let us. Yeah, we have talked enough. If we
Let us
should
stop.
open this for other people if they have something to say. Yeah, please do say something. Professor Ajit Mathur has said
As a
something
question.
as a question. Sir, why don't you come online? Are you there?
Yes, I was wondering
Here you are.
if you would care to sort of state your position on the question, because this whole issue of localization of the unconscious or related phenomena might be illuminated if you were to, from your respective positions, state where do you stand on this question? Am I in the body or is the body in me?
My first impulse is to hide behind Winnicott and say, this question should not be asked. And I am not hearing it.
Body and brain are the same. Body is the exoskeleton that carries brain. That's all.
But does your sense of identity come from there?
Sense of identity means then again brain has innate sense of identity, acquired sense of identity. Acquired sense of identity is actually directed by learning, which is a genetic process. So again, it is partly influenced by innate. Now learning would give us multiple layers of identity. So some of those identities are beyond the bodily reach of brain. So acquired identity of ours is more than body, more than physical space of mind, physical space of brain in some areas. But innate sense of identity and innate learning delivered sense of identity is inside body. So that would be the closest approximation of your answer that I can give.
Thank you, Bhaskar. May I also hear the others?
Sure.
Anurag, Anup, and Arka on the same question.
What would be your position on this? Or you don't, would you like to share with us?
I will, but let me hear your response first.
Okay. Anurag, you want to go?
I can go. Since I'm the least academically qualified, I feel freer. But the question, I think, can be broken down into two parts. One is what is the body, and the second is what is me. The body is more or less more easily definable as what is traditionally seen as the body. But what is me is the more interesting question. Is myself limited to my body, or is myself finding a transitory representation in my body, or transitory or localization in my body, as for example with any other kind of identity? That is my identity trapped in my bodily self, or is my identity trapped in, let's say, some certificate which I have received, or is it something beyond that? Now, I can say that it is a bit of a hologram, that for certain uses, I can say that my self is in my body, but that's not the entire truth. My self is not only my body, it extends outside me as well. It extends to, I am part of a bigger self, for one, a term which I like to use, and which is often mispronounced as terroir, that I am part of the wider terroir, which finds its expression in my bodily self, which will and is disintegrating as we speak. But this is one of my, this is one representation that it finds itself in, which can be seen. But I am part of this earth, which is speaking through me, through my body at this moment. And after some years, it will stop doing so. It's already creaking, but yeah.
One is, let me put it this way, it's a difficult question. We will not be perhaps able to answer it in that sense. Let me think of a situation where I look at myself in the mirror. So I see my body. I feel, oh, this is the body. If I close my eyes, I still have a sense of the body. I have a sense of the body, but not in the sense I see the body in the mirror, or the body gets seen anatomically. Western medicine, not Ayurveda. I see the body anatomically. I see the body under a scan, X-ray, etc., etc. But I shut my eyes. I have a sense of the body. I can feel my body. I have, and hence, that's the path I wanted to take. That the effective feel of oneself is important. That the body I feel. So in that sense, the question then would open up, Ajit sir, is that is this a dualism of substance? Is this a substance dualism? These are two bodies, or is this a dualism of perspective? It's a perspectival dualism, that I turn in a certain direction, I see the body in this form. I turn in another direction, I see the body in a very different form. Now, even in dreams, we have a body, but that is not the body we see. Even a blind person, congenital blind, would have a body. But what is that body? Break it down further. We have a body of Vayu, Pitta, Kapha, a body of 3 flows or 3 register of flows. We have a body currently, and COVID has opened it up, the immunological body, which is not a body with organs in the traditional sense, that it's not space, it's an antigen antibody dynamic. So that also opens up the question, which body is one which body am I in? Actually, I sometimes think, oh, we are at least in 3 bodies at the same time: the Galenic, the Ayurvedic body, the anatomical body, which is the traditional medical body, and the immunological body. So which body, and how is the self responding to that body? So we at least have, and your question is very important, actually, that the way you have posed it, that is it me having the body, or is it the body having me? The difficulty over here would be that if I follow the surface of the eye, I will suddenly reach the body. And if I follow the surface of the body, I will again accidentally at times reach the eye.
I wanted to interrupt you, because I was reminded of Long time back, we were writing about possession syndrome. I had just graduated from psychiatry, where I dealt a lot with possession syndrome. But I remember the title of this paper, which was that who possesses what? Does a what possess me, or does a who possess a what? Who possesses what? Something like that. It was about possession syndrome. But the question which it was trying to answer was similar to what Professor Mathur asked. Is a what possessing a who, or is it a who possesses a what? But yesterday we were watching this very funny animation thing called The Crudes. It is a cartoon in which is based on cavemen, and I wish I could have access to it. Well, I don't have time for it. In which suddenly he discovers that I have a brain, and a brain is where from which ideas come, and then ideas lead to other things and so on. But sorry for going into the animatedly into animation, but I was reminded of the title of this paper, Who Possesses What? Sir, you're my geographical.
That actually is
Professor
sparking
Mathur
of,
Professor
sparking
Mathur is
of
my
a line
geographical
in me.
neighbor.
Let me share it. Which hand is holding which one? It's very difficult.
That one.
It's very difficult. Very difficult.
Can you see that? That is the one that is holding the other one. That one.
So it's that problem, perhaps. My difficulties are these, sir. Not that I have an answer to your question. It's a very important question, but yeah. Would you want to say something? Orko is very quiet.
I feel like I should not be talking so much. It's after all a conversation that involves the three of you.
No, it is.
No, that's what I wanted.
No, we are done
to share his thoughts. We are
done. Yeah, we are
share
done. We have opened the
I think I'll just give a very brief answer, if I may. Anyway, I need to leave. I'm really sorry. This was a wonderful conversation. I'll just to Dr. Mathur, if I may say, one very quick response for me would be I would rather resist this idea that the self is the body, but the self is definitely embodied, and embodiment itself is an experience which works out very differently for each individual. The way I experience my body is not the way someone else would experience their bodies. And I think especially in psychoanalysis, the most important thing is how do we make sense, not just of our body, not just in the sense of the body image, as it is said in psychology and cognitive science, but also how do we make sense through the body? How do we talk? Because when we converse, when we use language, it is an interaction with our body. Language itself interacts with the body. I would again sort of take that definition of the unconscious in later Lacan very seriously, the definition of the unconscious as a speaking being, and it's a body that speaks. It's a speaking body. It's the being or the broken being, if I have to be rigorous about this, because there is no solid being in Lacan. It's a broken being or a fragmented being of the body that has an interaction with a speech that is also fragmented, I'm afraid. So it's a disturbing conversation between language and body, where both are not totalities, but fragments. Let me stop there. Thank you.
It's very interesting. We seem to be engaged in 4 different conversations at the moment, and let me try to voice what I see as the 4 conversations. When Bhaskar speaks about the primacy of the body, one has to, of course, ask Bhaskar that what about the gut? What about all the microorganisms that are in the gut? And what about the brains that are there? I'd like to engage in that conversation, that the brain is not only something neurological, it may be something more than that.
And I think
and
that
it's
is the
carried by
point,
us.
sir.
Yeah, and
And
sir,
That is the
I
point
have,
which
let me
is
finish.
Yeah,
Let me
please.
finish. So that is one conversation that is required with Bhaskar on the brain and the gut. With Anurag, my issue of conversation would be that we carry three histories actually, without being always aware of it. One is the history of the earth itself, the history of the universe, the history of the earth. The second is the history of all life, such as it is, and the way the species interconnect. And the third is the history of what we call the apex predators, the humans. So when these three histories get mixed up, then which terroir are you in is something to think about, and one could have a conversation about that. When Anup speaks of mirror, I'm reminded of the mirror test, which is a very basic test that is done to look at whether animals have the sense of self. And many animals will fail the mirror test, including dogs. Dogs will fail the mirror test. But dogs do have a sense of themselves, which is based on smell, not on sight. So it's not only about sight. So the primacy of the eye or the brain can't be everything. We have to look at all the senses that we carry. And Anup was in touch with that when he spoke about how much sensing there would be. But then the question would be that, okay, if we have to look at the totality of our senses, then we have to look at not the primacy of the mirror test, but the primacy of the sense of senses that is present. And Arka said it all when he said that the self is embodied as an experience, and he talked about the piece of the fragment. And I think it was not only Lacan, it was actually even Erna Hock brought this up in her writings, that we're not speaking only about fragments of, but we could even talk about fragments of souls in that sense. And Erna Hock went on record to say that she didn't see any distinction between a piece of a soul and a piece of the mind. So, and this was a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst who lived all her life in different places, including part of it in India, part of it in Switzerland, part of it elsewhere. So Arka, I think you're also right. So each of you is right in your own way, but there are four conversations here, not just one. So where do the four conversations meet? That confluence would be a very fascinating point of, what shall I say? Some kind of a locum, if one could call it that, or some kind of a nexus where the four conversations actually have a point in connection. I'll stop here.
I think at the present moment, the 4 conversations meet in you, sir. And you managed to resurrect Arka from his premature death in this conversation just for a brief moment, and now he's left again. So thank you for the resurrection. I think Apurva Vyas wanted to say something. Apurva, are you still there?
Yeah, he's there.
Yeah, right. You're right in front of me. Please say something.
You're muted, perhaps, Apurva?
Yeah. No, he's not on mute, but we can't hear him.
We can't hear you.
Say something, Apurva. Your voice is coming and going, Apurva. Yeah,
is this better?
Now I have it. This is better, yeah.
Yeah, I joined you all from Montreal, Canada. Somebody shared the link, and I'm very happy to have witnessed an enlightening conversation. I come from a very non-academic background. I'm simply an enthusiast in learning about the mind. The things that were discussed in the conversation, the idea of a shared or a networked mind or a super mind or a converging mind, On a lighter note, in the spirit of humor, I would like to say, if we all suffer from the same thing, what is the prognosis? And if there is such a thing, will we ever heal? What will we die of first? On a more serious note, if the shared delocalized self-experiencing supermind model is true, then learning and sensory inputs, including knowledge itself, should be immediately transferable. Things like telekinesis and telepathy are immediately possible or within the realm of possibility. In such an open source model of the mind has only been discovered now, how can we rule out that it wasn't the case all along throughout the history of evolution? And now, in retrospect, how does that inform the theory of evolution, our understanding of even things such as religious texts and the human hierarchical system? Where is the server of the cell of this so-called supermind? Where is it hosted? Is it hosted within our ecosystem or is it somewhere else? And lastly, how does one, with all this information, how does one structure society and structure education? Last question that I have, somebody may answer: what is the purpose of art in the scheme of things, and is there a purpose of art? These are some of the things that I was curious about.
I think this is turning into a question and answer session. But since you have turned it into a question and answer session for the time being, no more questions allowed, only conversations allowed. This is not a, what is it? It's a corticocentric model where Gyan shall flow from the talking heads. But, you know, you were talking about how things go around in telekinesis and so on. The closest thing which comes to my mind is how, in this era, how fast misinformation and disinformation disseminates. You know, we have seen this in this COVID times, and that is the closest thing to telekinesis that I have seen. How fast, you know, well, forgive me, but how fast bullshit spreads in this age of interconnectivity where we are connected through the internet and so on and so forth. That it's so easy to disseminate both good and bad information. We are surrounded by a dense network of information. We have never had so much information in this world before. For example, just 100, 150 years ago, the number of animals and human beings were much less on this earth, which is animals and human beings are embodied pieces of you know, information. They contain DNA and RNA. And then they speak and they gesture and they produce information. And now we transmit that information electronically all over the world at gigantic, ginormous rates. And with 5G coming in, it will be even more ginormous. Now, with this dense jelly of information, if one were to think of it, that we are encased in, if there is a problem in this jelly of information, whether this jelly is DNA, RNA, and so on encoded information, which is, you know, living beings, or electronic information, both of which interact with each other, as we can see in our pandemic. If anything has taught us anything in this pandemic is how electronic and non-electronic information interact with each other. If we have a rumor which says vaccines are bad, that can impact, you know, your health very, very directly through the other, you know, human and animals that are around you, right? So this jelly, what this jelly needs is stabilizing structures, you know, which can, like in our DNA, we have parts of our DNA which, you know, splice out parts of the DNA which are not good, which are mistakes. Bhaskar is the expert on that. He can say more about that. So that, you know, cancers are not caused, etc., etc. Similarly, for our informational jelly, we need splicing bodies, you know, people whom can be relied on. For example, WHO used to be one such structure before, you know, it wasn't. We need institutions which can splice the bad information out and which can replace it with, you know, decent information. For example, in the stock market, you have, you know that, you know, thousands and thousands, if not millions of people trading, but there is a structure to it which provides, you know, the right information to everybody. Similarly, for all kinds of information, we need these institutional splicing structures which can take out the bad stuff. So this is my take on it. Bhaskar, why don't you say something instead of messaging me?
Actually,
I'm going to get a glass of water while Bhaskar speaks. Bhaskar, please go ahead.
while you are talking about 5G and information exchange, I was thinking about integrated information theory. This is a theory that has come out to answer consciousness and how the hard problem of consciousness can be answered. And it says that the window of communication between two physical objects, if sufficiently jumbled up and sufficiently random, and they go on beyond a certain number of times, they can create a consciousness in the communication. Now, let's take 5G internet and Internet of Things. It would create a revolution in a lot of things, but it might even create a separate mega or giant artificial consciousness, which would be created by various devices all over the world communicating with each other in almost lightning speed. So, yes, we probably are going to see birth of a new consciousness in recent years. If integrated information theory is logically correct. So far, it has been able to logically explain a lot of things. So we might see a new consciousness.
Well, I'm also conscious about that we have time, and also that some people have been wanting to speak for some time. So we're going to take two more. Again, I'm afraid people are asking questions rather than saying what they have on their mind. But Sambit, Basu, and then Harish Narayan Das, and then we will stop. Sambit, go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, I just share my point of view. It is very naive. I am not a student of the discipline, but still I'll share my point of view. It is like when from my experiential self, when I try to localize my brain, then what happens is that when I run, I can feel that my lungs, it is has become racing. And so I can in some way localize my lung out there, or my other body parts, I have some notion where it is. But when I try to think where my thought is coming from, then I really cannot localize to a particular position in my body. This comes from directly from my experience. But nevertheless, if from the traditional way of thinking, I at least think up to this, that the thought is originating within the periphery, within the boundary of my physical body. So that kind of notion is there, that the thought is not astral or outside me. It is within this confinement of the physical body. But the exact location, that from my experience, I am not able, because if I pressurize some of my organs more, I feel pain. My eyes I can see, or my ears I can see. But if I even think very hard, my brain doesn't pain, so that I can make an immediate connection that I'm thinking hard and this part is paining. So that means these are related. Sometimes over a very fatigued brain work, maybe we feel headache, but that is indirect and doesn't give us that experiential notion that it's actually the thought is arising from that part. But on the other hand, when we have an objective gaze, then we are just studying it, and we are trying to systematically making experimentation, and then we can really locate it there. And then once I am informed, then I can start imagining, yes, it's coming from that part. So then that notion, they all stays like at tandem and gives me some impression. And another thing, this is one thing I would like to say. And another thing I would like to share is the two things that we are talking about, the neurological approach and the psychoanalytic approach. But then it is like the brain, often it is accessible through language. And if it is accessible through language, then what happens is that actually we are also kind of working with the neural circuits when we are doing psychoanalysis. So it is also a neuroscience. So the method is only signaling, but the way of getting into engagement of signal, that is through language. So that can be of effect. And when seen from this point of view, maybe they don't seem to be so different as it seems when we think that this is something which has materialistic kind of causal basis, and the other thing, it is all hypothetical. But it's not that. Yeah, that's all I would like to point out.
Thank you, Sambit, because I wanted to connect what you are saying
Well
to
put.
what. No, not to the next person I had identified, Harish Narayan Das. Harish, are you there? Because he had asked a question about somatic pathology, which I think is connected to what Sambit is saying.
Yeah, I'm here.
Sure. Yes, please go ahead.
The question is out there. I mean, in the sense, I'm a social anthropologist, nothing to do with psychiatry, but I'm also a historian of medicine, and I study medicine as an object of inquiry as an anthropologist. So I'm very intrigued by this conversation that you all are having, and I came a bit late to the conversation, so my apologies. So my question is, I was very intrigued by the kind of things all of you all were saying, especially what Anup was saying in response to the other gentleman whose name I'm not able to recall, that you needn't localize. The localization is an act of fiction. I mean, in the sense, but supposing you have a somatic pathology, and say you have a hole in the heart, and you need to close the hole in the heart, then would you then say the same thing, that the somatic pathology also need not be localized? I needn't close the hole in the heart, or would you? I mean, so I'm flummoxed.
Before we attend the flummoxedness, I'm very curious about your location. Where are you located, sir? Which part of the world?
I teach in JNU.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Because I used to live next to JNU, and my father used to work a lot with JNU when he was alive. He was an economist, and I have very fond memories of sitting on the back of his scooter and going to JNU as a child.
Okay.
So
thank you. I mean, yes, I'm in the same building as where your father used to be, on the ground floor. I think your father's department is on the top floor. I am in the department of sociology. I'm a social anthropologist and ethnographer.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Bhaskar, would you like to respond, or Anup?
Bhaskar, you go first, because I have something very interesting to share, Anurag.
Less interesting people should go first. Huh?
The interesting is not the response to the question.
What Bhaskar has to say is less interesting. But anyway,
ऐसा नहीं है. चलो. Actually, Harish sir, we have met before, I think, in Banyan, Chennai.
Oh yeah. I'm so sorry.
That is the interesting thing, Anurag.
Okay.
So not just JNU, and I will remember a line by you all my life. I have invoked it many times in my life. I've also taught your work in my courses. We were discussing possession, Anurag.
Okay.
In Banyan, Chennai, mental health. I think that year even Dr. Jadhav, Shushu Jadhav was also there. Harish sir, I think.
Yes,
He was also there. And um, negative emotions were in the room regarding possession, and all the kind of healing procedures that are at work, etc. And Harish sir was seated in front of me, just two rows in front of me. I even remember where he was in that room. And he said, "You people don't have a problem if one person is boxing another person in an Olympic championship, some medal, and the whole crowd is cheering. You don't have a problem because you have been normalized to this violence. Whereas, even the self-inflicted violence in possession, not to say that's the best thing in the world. No, he was not saying that. He was saying, but there, your stigmatization is so high, but your stigmatization of normalized modern violence, boxing, is not at work. Harish sir, you may not be even remembering you said it, but it was a very, very important learning for me. So that's what I wanted to bring Anurag to the table. It's interesting, after so many years we meet, and I was not even expecting you in this discussion today. And that's also my limitation. Why was I not expecting you over here? That is also true. To your question, actually, see, I don't have an answer like that. We would, of course, be trying to take care of that, perforation in the septum of the heart, or we would take care of a heart valve, etc., etc. Of course, we would take care. We would remove an appendix if there is an appendicular infection. We would do that. But the question is, when it comes to, say, for example, consciousness or the unconscious, can we localize it in one center of the brain? And this is how I think even me, Anurag, and Bhaskar, all three of us were taught when we were medical students. We were trained to localize, but slowly. And there is a work of an Indian over here, V.S. Ramchandran, actually, who is showing that even vision cannot be located in just the occipital lobe. So it is a complex configuration of, if I'm remembering it correctly, 17 plus centers or locations in the brain. And if slowly we have other ideas of the brain, and I'm thinking of Roger Penrose over here, the large, small, and the human mind. If the brain is thought very differently tomorrow, maybe we will not think in terms of localization. We'll think in terms of those, let me be provocative over here, of old Ayurvedic flows, of humors, Galenic humors. Maybe the anatomical notion of the body, that there are parts and parts and parts and parts, is only a modern 18th, Michel Foucault's work, Birth of the Clinic, only an 18th century notion of the body. And friends like Bhaskar are already moving out of that notion of the body, actually. And already Donna Haraway has a beautiful paper, how we have moved from the anatomical clinical body to the immunological. See, COVID is understood entirely in terms of...
Anup, if I can interrupt you?
Yes,
I think
please.
this is a very good example, because what we would do in this case has changed in my lifetime.
Okay.
Let's say a hole in the heart, and I think Bhaskar, you are the person to, because he's the prime culprit for this change in my life. So he will say something, and then if I think that something is left over, then I'll say, how do we approach a hole in the heart as a doctor right now? Is now become, in the last 10 years, has become so different from what it was earlier.
Yes.
And in case you can, if you want, Bhaskar, you can also replace the hole in the heart by some other.
Yes, various ways.
Anurag, Bhaskar, ek line. See, Bhaskar, remember, we used to remove the stomach for peptic ulcer.
Yes.
We used to remove the thyroid for goiter once upon a time. Today, we don't do that. We look at the thyroid through an immunological process, actually, autoimmune carrier.
Yes. Actually, I would answer your question from two interfighting side of mine. One side is geneticist who sees everything very particularly, and other side is neuro student of neuroscience. So I would say localization still has value, but localization to what is a problem in everything. Let's say your question of a hole in heart. A hole in heart is a localized thing, but is it a localized thing? A hole in heart that Dr. Anurag Mishra was referring to, I can now treat not via surgery. I can treat it via increasing the growth potential of cardiac stem cells. Number one. Number two, that problem, that hole in heart, I can treat via changing the myocyte bridging pattern of the area of heart where the hole is located, and I don't need any kind of surgery for that. Thirdly, I can give a membrane to the heart area where the hole is located, and then can actually encourage the myocytes to grow over there. These three are the actually now prominent ways that are being researched for closing the hole of the heart. But there is another thing. A defect in brain is different from a hole in heart, because a defect in brain, those which we treat, are more like cardiomyopathy. Cardiomyopathy means whole heart's myocardium is not working well. We cannot pinpoint which myocytes are working, so we cannot actually localize. Similarly, when brain dysfunctions and create psychiatric or neurological symptom, initially we used to think these are the areas. For example, epilepsy. For epilepsy, we had notions that this is the scar. This scar is producing the problem. Remove the scar, it would go all right. This was the idea of epilepsy surgery initially. Later, we started understanding not at all. The scar is just a red herring. These brains have mutation in their ion channels, which are not only in the brain but also in the heart, because heart also relies on the same ion channels. So these people actually have that we used to call epileptic death, sudden epileptic death, that occurs due to these silent cardiac channels which are malformed. They get activated and the patient get a fatal arrhythmia, means the heart either stops or go into such chaotic overdrive that it stops. Then after epilepsy surgery, when patients don't recover, we start understanding, no, the scar is not the origin of the epilepsy. The epilepsy is arising from all over the brain because the brain has silent mutation. So our idea of localization is changing. On one side, we are localizing the defect to specific segments of DNA. Sometimes it's gene, sometimes it is non-genetic part of DNA. And the other side, we are going beyond organ-specific localization. We are understanding that something that affects gene has a body-wide manifestation. And so everything becomes interlinked. Today, when I talk about psychiatric symptoms in my students, I teach them diabetes, hypertension, cancer, psychiatric symptom, kidney diseases, brain, gut diseases, all are actually fruit of the same tree. The same tree is genetic disturbance and they produce different things. first 3-letter disturbance produces brain. First 3 plus middle 3 produce something else. And it is becoming a very fascinating thing. One side, we are localizing, pinpointing actually what is the defect. But when we see that defect, it gets such amount of magnification that ultimately whole body is affected. This is the intrinsic, I would say, conflict in myself, because I am a student of both areas and I myself find it odd.
So, but what becomes very interesting is how do you approach somebody, a patient, for example, the way that you approach that person, the kind of questions that you ask them about their parents, their grandparents, the illnesses in their family have changed remarkably over the last 5 years.
Yes.
That the way in which we take our histories, for example, we are asking now about all kinds of stuff which we never used to ask about earlier. And we are looking at all kinds of stuff as being very closely linked together. And this is why DSM has gone into the garbage bin, because as Bhaskar said, it is a collection of symptoms rather than diseases. Now we're getting to what are the bunch of mutations and so on in the genes which are causing a whole bunch of things. A hole in the heart may be associated with a cyst in the kidney, may be associated with a cyst in the brain, etc., etc., etc. But we have to, really look at it in its entirety. And similarly, what does a person who has a hole in the heart really feel? I mean, does he feel like a hole in the heart subjectively? For example, many people with some kind of mitral valve prolapse and so on, they have a fluttering feeling and they feel anxious. Is the anxiety related to the mitral valve prolapse? Not what is going on. So these are interlinked questions. So even as a psychotherapist or as a psychoanalyst, you have to understand what is the connection between all these things and the subjective feeling. That was a bit too much from the heart, I suspect.
Can I just, is it possible to carry on this conversation for a couple of more minutes?
Sure, yes. Why not? That's the nature of conversations. They carry on.
For this response, and thanks Anup for remembering this, and I'm so sorry I'd forgotten. We must meet again. And but the thing is, the two of you all, that's I think Anurag, is it? Am I right? Anurag and Bhaskar.
Yes.
The two of you all, unlike Anup, I think Anup, for example, invoked Ayurveda. And because that's something I also work on. I also work on alternative systems in medicine. And I'm fully aware of what he's saying, that we are stuck with this. The reason why we are enunciating what we are enunciating is, as he rightly pointed out, is because we are saddled with a particular conception of the body starting with the early 19th century, from 1800 onwards. And the founding moment is what is called histology. Now the thing is, the two of you all have offered responses, and those responses still largely stay with what's called the material realm. It's still based on a metaphysical premise of materialism. So, for example, will you be willing to countenance the fact, since Anup reminded us of possession, that you could have a hole in the heart because you might be having a problem with your ancestors, and because you didn't do some funerary rite properly, and when your granddad was dying, you didn't give him the rice cake that he wanted at the moment of his death. And the reason why you have a hole in the heart is because of a broken relationship with your granddad. And that the way to fix the hole in the heart is to restart a conversation with your grandfather who's died, and the hole in the heart will be fixed. So is that something y'all are willing to countenance? And is the question that I need to ask y'all.
We're back into asking questions, but
I mean, well, the reason I'm asking this is, as I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm an anthropologist. And but then I have an interest in this because these are all, and these are terribly important questions. I mean, in the sense, so if you all have an answer to this, I'd be grateful. But if you don't feel like it, that's fine too.
No, I definitely think there's something going on with your grandparents when you have a hole in the heart. Whether that can be healed by a conversation with them or not depends on the kind of hole that you have, and depends on the kind of heart that we are talking about. But definitely it can be alleviated by a conversation with your grandparents, and whether it is through rituals or not through various rituals, it can definitely be alleviated. The suffering at least can be alleviated, if not the hole filled up. But it has definitely got something to do with your grandparents, whether at a material level or at another level. Thank you, sir. And you know, I was just saying that it's the nature of conversation, good conversations, that they carry on. Okay. But it's unfortunately also the nature of these meetings. Unlike I mentioned to Anup that we are in the Indian classical music mode, where an alap can carry on for hours, sometimes even till the morning. But the audience for Indian classical music has dwindled. So Ankita has something to say, and after that, I'm afraid we'll have to close our. I can't even say jugalbandi. What is the appropriate word when there are a number of musicians collaborating? Or is it still jugalbandi?
The Adivasi never dances alone. They always dance together.
Well, Ankita, your latest entrant to this Adivasi dancing circle.
Thank you. I'm actually a student. I mean, I was not taught by Professor Narudhar. The rest of the class was, unfortunately.
What were you doing?
Masters in psychosocial clinical studies.
Well, how come the rest of the class was taught by him and you were not?
We were divided into like two batches. But yeah, I was actually reminded of the COVID, the dissertation on COVID that I was trying to do, that I attempted to do. You know, and when I was reading about the anxieties that the non-localized nature of the virus evoked in people, and I was wondering if this is what we are trying to do in this talk, you know, that the consciousness is so non-localized in our, you know, the idea of it is so non-localized that we keep trying to do that. And Harish sir also said that, you know, it's also fiction to localize something, especially consciousness. And I was also wondering if it's this our need to have some control or sense of control by trying to localize consciousness, that we keep trying to think whether it's in the body or body's in the mind, or where is the mind. So it's not even a question, just something that, you know, and because I've just started working, you know, with people. So that's why I use the example of dreams, you know, when we talk about dreams, then whose interpretation matters. So I was relating it to this localization, whose localization matters more, you know, in the session, whether it's the patient who wants to localize it somewhere else or one part of the body. Do we say that no, it's here in the brain, or do we say, or do we agree? So that's what I was just thinking, that whether we in sessions we try to give that control, the sense of control to the patient, that okay, if this is where you feel it is, that's where it is, if it's working for you. So why can't we do it you know, universally? Why can't we agree that we cannot universally like localize the consciousness in like one tangible, I don't know, thing? So just a reflection, very amateur probably.
I think our conversation is moving on when we have arrived to reflections. That's good. But you know, localization has its uses. For example, SIRS Institute is often various activities are attributed to SIRS Institute, JNU. And we are all localized to one identity or the other, as an Indian or as a this or a that. These are administratively useful. But this is a very interesting thing which happened earlier with this whole business of dissociative disorders. Now, dissociative disorders were very geographically localized earlier. For example, they were localized in the DSM under culture-specific disorders. So the Americans' idea was that if, let's say, Dhat syndrome happened in India, it was an Indian disorder. So it was a so it was a bit of a way of thinking, like, if something happens to your hand, I mean, it's a disorder. If you have a fracture of the hand, I mean, that's a separate disorder than all other kinds of fractures. So if something happens in Malaysia, for example, there were some certain Malaysian culture specific disorders. So the Americans' idea was that each disorder is identified with a particular geography. Interestingly, there was no American specific cultural disorder, nor was there a Canadian culture specific disorder, as there is no Canadian cuisine identified. So there was no Canadian culture specific disorder in America, but these were disorders located in India and this and that. That was all, of course, nonsense. And these were local expressions of, common problems, as, an Indian will speak in, whatever Indian language he is speaking in or she is speaking in, or that, he might be possessed by Devi or Mata or something, and an American will be possessed by aliens and he will be transported to an alien ship. So these are different things, but to misidentify them locally is not very good, practice, I think. Anup, Bhaskar, do you want to say something? Anybody else? So I think similarly, other kinds of localization have happened into syndromes, this syndrome, that syndrome. That is why DSM needs to be thrown into the dustbin. It has ceased to be useful, because these are the same kind of localizations as the Dhat syndrome is an Indian disorder or something else. We need to get to the root of what the problem is rather than misidentify it. It had its purpose when, it was misidentified, because we had a series of treatments which were, helping them. But now, if we actually get to the root cause, then we find that we can help people in very different, very basic ways and far better. What we say is just see our results. Our results are better now with the new approach than with the old approach. We treat a wider range of people. Now not everybody does, but people like Bhaskar do. And we treat a wider range of, and we treat it better. The result speaks,
I've written, Ankita, that your point is a very important point, and we need to continue conversation on this. Actually, we won't be able to clinch it, maybe, Anurag, right, in today's discussion, but it's something we will have to continue conversation on. Think about it.
Thank you for listening. I just want
the answer is not blowing in the wind. That's the problem.
So, as they say in Hindi, and this is rather a request at the end of the performance, as somebody said, jamming. इस सभा को विसर्जित किया जाए, or should we close for the evening? What do people say? If anybody has something very urgent to say, please say. Otherwise, we'll hand it over to Sonali to finish it off. 1, 2, 3. Sonali, it's up to you now.
Well, to speak very honestly, it was mind-blowing. It was like far more than a conversation. It was a lot of information, a lot of... I have actually written down what I felt. May I just read it? So what I experienced...
conversation by a proclamation. But go.
So I felt like there were brains, there was neurology, there was metapsychology, body, laka, supercell structure of the heart. And I must confess, and in all of this brilliant talk by brilliant people, some of it just went over my head today. So excuse me for that, but I think if we're putting our talks like this, thumbs up. Yeah.
So on a somatic note, thumbs up. Thank you everyone for coming in. In case you didn't grasp everything, I must say neither did I. But I hope that our conversation carries on. Please stay in touch, and I hope not understanding or whatever else doesn't put you off from further conversations with us at our exploding institute, where we try to do things differently. I'm afraid we don't manage to do things in quite the same way as other people do, but that's just the way we are, and that's the way we would like to be. So I hope you like that way of being. So Bhaskar has already become a brain, and I suspect, yeah, there you are again, Bhaskar. So thank you, Bhaskar, Anup, everyone else for coming in, for sharing your thoughts, and for staying for this rather long session. So good night, everyone, and till next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.